Chapter 25 of the Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 25. There was a roaring in the wind all night. The rain came heavily and fell in floods, but now the sun is rising calm and bright. The birds are singing in the distant woods. Attributed to Wordsworth. As the light returned, Pathfinder and Cap ascended again to the roof, with a view to reconnoitre the state of things once more on the island. This part of the blockhouse had a low battlement around it, which afforded a considerable protection to those who stood in its centre, the intention having been to enable marksmen to lie behind it and to fire over its top. By making proper use, therefore, of these slight defences, slight as to height, though abundantly ample as far as they went, the two lookouts commanded a pretty good view of the island, its covers excepted, and of most of the channels that led to the spot. The gale was still blowing very fresh at south, and there were places in the river where its surface looked green and angry, though the wind had hardly sweep enough to raise the water into foam. The shape of the little island was nearly oval, and its greater length was from east to west. By keeping in the channels that washed it, in consequence of their several courses and of the direction of the gale, it would have been possible for a vessel to range past the island on either of its principal sides, and always to keep the wind very nearly abeam. These were the facts first noticed by Cap, and explained to his companion, for the hopes of both now rested on the chances of relief sent from Oswego. At this instant, while they stood gazing anxiously about them, Cap cried out, in his lusty, hearty manner, "Sail ho!" Pathfinder turned quickly in the direction of his companion's face, and there, sure enough, was just visible the object of the old sailor's exclamation. The elevation enabled the two to overlook the low land of several of the adjacent islands, and the canvas of a vessel was seen through the bushes that fringed the shore of one that lay to the southward and westward. The stranger was under what seamen call low sail, but so great was the power of the wind that her white outlines were seen flying past the openings of the verdure with the velocity of a fast-travelling horse, resembling a cloud driving in the heavens. "That cannot be Jasper," said Pathfinder in disappointment, for he did not recognize the cutter of his friend in the swift passing object. No, the lad is behind the hour, and that is some craft which the Frenchers have sent to aid their friends, the accursed Mingos." "This time you are out of your reckoning, friend Pathfinder, if you never were before," returned Cap in a manner that had lost none of its dogmatism by the critical circumstances in which they were placed. "Fresh water or salt, that is the head of the Scud's mainsail, for it is cut with a smaller gore than common, and then you can see that the gaff has been fished, quite neatly done, I admit, but fished." "I can see none of this, I confess," answered Pathfinder, to whom even the terms of his companion were Greek. "No! Well, I own that surprises me, for I thought your eyes could see anything. Now, to me, nothing is plainer than that gore and that fish, and I must say, my honest friend, that in your place I should apprehend that my sight was beginning to fail." "If Jasper is truly coming, I shall apprehend but little. We can make good the block against the whole Mingo nation for the next 8 or 10 hours, and with O'Deuce to cover the retreat, I shall despair of nothing. God send that the lad may not run alongside of the bank and fall into an ambushment, as befell the sergeant." "Ay, there's the danger. There ought to have been signals concerted, and an anchorage ground buoyed out, and even a quarantine station or a lazaretto would have been useful, could we have made these Minks respect the laws. If the lad fetches up, as you say, anywhere in the neighborhood of this island, we may look upon the cutter as lost. And after all, Master Pathfinder, ought we not to set down this same Jasper as a secret ally of the French, rather than as a friend of our own? I know the sergeant views the matter in that light, and I must say this whole affair looks like treason." We shall soon know, Master Cap, for there indeed comes the cutter clear of the other island, and 5 minutes must settle the matter. It would be no more than fair, however, if we could give the boy some sign in the way of warning. It is not right that he should fall into the trap without a notice that it has been laid." Anxiety and suspense, notwithstanding, prevented either from attempting to make any signal. It was not easy, truly, to see how it could be done, for the Scud came foaming through the channel, on the weather side of the island, at a rate that scarcely admitted of the necessary time. Nor was any one visible on her deck to make signs too. Even her helm seemed deserted, though her course was as steady as her progress was rapid. Cap stood in silent admiration of a spectacle so unusual, but as the Scud drew nearer, his practised eye detected the helm in play by means of tiller ropes, though the person who steered was concealed. As the cutter had weatherboards of some little height, the mystery was explained, no doubt remaining that her people lay behind the latter in order to be protected from the rifles of the enemy. As this fact showed that no force beyond that of the small crew could be on board, Pathfinder received his companion's explanation with an ominous shake of the head. "This proves that the Sarpent has not reached Oswego," said he, "and that we are not to expect succor from the garrison. I hope Lundy has not taken it into his head to displace the lad, for Jasper Western would be a host of himself in such a strait. We three, Master Cap, ought to make a manful warfare. You, as a seaman, to keep up the intercourse with the cutter; Jasper, as a laker who knows all that is necessary to be done on the water; and I, with gifts that are as good as any among the Mingos, let me be what I may in other particulars. I say we ought to make a manful fight in Mabel's behalf." "That we ought, and that we will," answered Cap heartily, for he began to have more confidence in the security of his scalp now that he saw the sun again. "I set down the arrival of the Scud as one circumstance, and the chances of Eau Douce's honesty as another. This Jasper is a young man of prudence, you find, for he keeps a good offing, and seems determined to know how matters stand on the island before he ventures to bring up." "I have it! I have it!" exclaimed Pathfinder, with exultation. "There lies the canoe of the Sarpent on the cutter's deck, and the chief has got on board, and no doubt has given a true account of our condition, for, unlike a Mingo, a Delaware is sartain to get a story right, or to hold his tongue." "That canoe may not belong to the cutter," said the captious seaman. "Eau Douce had one on board when he sailed." "Very true, friend Cap; but if you know your sails and masts by your gores and fishes, I know my canoes and my paths by frontier knowledge. If you can see new cloth in a sail, I can see new bark in a canoe. That is the boat of the Sarpent, and the noble fellow has struck off for the garrison as soon as he found the block besieged, has fallen in with the Scud, and after telling his story has brought the cutter down here to see what can be done. The Lord grant that Jasper Western be still on board her." "Yes, yes, it might not be amiss, for, traitor or loyal, the lad has a handy way with him in a gale, it must be owned." "And in coming over waterfalls," said Pathfinder, nudging the ribs of his companion with an elbow, and laughing in his silent but hearty manner. "We will give the boy his due, though he scalps us all with his own hand." The Scud was now so near that Cap made no reply. The scene, just at that instant, was so peculiar that it merits a particular description, which may also aid the reader in forming a more accurate nature of the picture we wish to draw. The gale was still blowing violently. Many of the smaller trees bowed their tops, as if ready to descend to the earth, while the rushing of the wind through the branches of the groves resembled the roar of distant chariots. The air was filled with leaves, which, at that late season, were readily driven from their stems, and flew from island to island like flights of birds. With this exception, the spot seemed silent as the grave. That the savages still remained was to be inferred from the fact that their canoes, together with the boats of the 55th, lay in a group in the little cove that had been selected as a harbor. Otherwise, not a sign of their presence was to be detected. Though taken entirely by surprise by the cutter, the sudden return of which was altogether unlooked for, so uniform and inbred were their habits of caution while on the war-path, that the instant an alarm was given every man had taken to his cover with the instinct and cunning of a fox seeking his hole. The same stillness reigned in the blockhouse, for though Pathfinder and Cap could command a view of the channel, they took the precaution necessary to lie concealed. The unusual absence of anything like animal life on board the Scud, too, was still more remarkable. As the Indians witnessed her apparently undirected movements, a feeling of awe gained a footing among them, and some of the boldest of their party began to distrust the issue of an expedition that had commenced so prosperously. Even Arrowhead, accustomed as he was to intercourse with the whites on both sides of the lakes, fancied there was something ominous in the appearance of this unmanned vessel, and he would gladly at that moment have been landed again on the main. In the meantime, the progress of the cutter was steady and rapid. She held her way mid-channel, now inclining to the gusts, and now rising again, like the philosopher that bends to the calamities of life, to resume his erect attitude as they pass away, but always piling the water beneath her bows in foam. Although she was under so very short canvas, her velocity was great, and there could not have elapsed 10 minutes between the time when her sails were first seen glancing past the trees and bushes in the distance, and the moment when she was abreast of the blockhouse. Cap and Pathfinder leaned forward, as the cutter came beneath their eyrie, eager to get a better view of her deck, when, to the delight of both, Jasper Eau douce sprang upon his feet and gave 3 hearty cheers. Regardless of all risk, Cap leaped upon the rampart of logs and returned the greeting, cheer for cheer. Happily, the policy of the enemy saved the latter, for they still lay quiet, not a rifle being discharged. On the other hand, Pathfinder kept in view the useful, utterly disregarding the mere dramatic part of warfare. The moment he beheld his friend Jasper, he called out to him with stentorian lungs, "Stand by us, lad, and the day's our own. Give 'em a grist in yonder bushes, and you'll put 'em up like partridges." Part of this reached Jasper's ears, but most was borne off to leeward on the wings of the wind. By the time this was said, the Scud had driven past, and in the next moment she was hid from view by the grove in which the blockhouse was partially concealed. 2 anxious minutes succeeded, but at the expiration of that brief space, the sails were again gleaming through the trees, Jasper having wore, jibed, and hauled up under the lee of the island on the other tack. The wind was free enough, as has already been explained, to admit of this maneuver, and the cutter, catching the current under her lee bow, was breasted up to her course in a way that showed she would come out to windward of the island again without any difficulty. This whole evolution was made with the greatest facility, not a sheet being touched, the sails trimming themselves, the rudder alone controlling the admirable machine. The object appeared to be a reconnaissance. When, however, the Scud had made the circuit of the entire island, and had again got her weatherly position in the channel by which she had first approached, her helm was put down and she tacked. The noise of the mainsail flapping when it filled, loose reefed as it was, sounded like the report of a gun, and Cap trembled lest the seams should open. "His Majesty gives good canvas, it must be owned," muttered the old seaman. "And it must be owned, too, that boy handles his boat as if he were thoroughly bred. Damn me, Master Pathfinder, if I believe, after all that has been reported in the matter, that this Mr. Eau douce got his trade on this bit of fresh water." "He did. Yes, he did. He never saw the ocean, and has come by his calling altogether up here on Ontario. I have often thought he has a natural gift in the way of schooners and sloops, and have respected him accordingly. As for treason and lying, and black-hearted vices, friend Cap, Jasper Western is as free as the most virtuous of the Delaware warriors, and if you crave to see a truly honest man, you must go among that tribe to discover him." "There he comes round!" exclaimed the delighted Cap, the Scud at this moment filling on her original tack. "And now we shall see what the boy would be at. He cannot mean to keep running up and down these passages, like a girl footing it through a country dance." The Scud now kept so much way that for a moment the two observers on the blockhouse feared Jasper meant to come too, and the savages, in their lairs, gleamed out upon her with the sort of exultation that the crouching tiger may be supposed to feel as he sees his unconscious victim approach his bed. But Jasper had no such intention. Familiar with the shore, and acquainted with the depth of water on every part of the island, he well knew that the Scud might be run against the bank with impunity, and he ventured fearlessly so near that, as he passed through the little cove, he swept the two boats of the soldiers from their fastenings and forced them out into the channel, towing them with the cutter. As all the canoes were fastened to the two Dunham boats, by this bold and successful attempt the savages were at once deprived of the means of quitting the island, unless by swimming, and they appeared to be instantly aware of the very important fact. Rising in a body, they filled the air with yells and poured in a harmless fire. While up in this unguarded manner, two rifles were discharged by their adversaries. One came from the summit of the block, and an Iroquois fell dead in his tracks, shot through the brain. The other came from the Scud. The last was the piece of the Delaware, but, less true than that of his friend, it only maimed an enemy for life. The people of the Scud shouted, and the savages sank again, to a man, as if it might be, into the earth. "That was the Sarpent's voice," said Pathfinder, as soon as the second piece was discharged. "I know the crack of his rifle as well as I do that of Killdeer. 'Tis a good barrel, though not sartain death. Well, well, with Chingachgook and Jasper on the water, and you and I in the block, Fencap, it will be hard if we don't teach these Mingo scamps the rationality of a fight." All this time the Scud was in motion. As soon as he had reached the end of the island, Jasper sent his prizes adrift, and they went down before the wind until they stranded on a point half a mile to leeward. He then wore, and came stemming the current again through the other passage. Those on the summit of the block could now perceive that something was in agitation on the deck of the Scud, and, to their great delight, just as the cutter came abreast of the principal cove, on the spot where most of the enemy lay, the howitzer which composed her sole armament was unmasked, and a shower of case shot was sent hissing into the bushes. A bevy of quail would not have risen quicker than this unexpected discharge of iron hail put up the Iroquois, when a second savage fell by a messenger sent from Killdeer, and another went limping away by a visit from the rifle of Chingachgook. New covers were immediately found, however, and each party seemed to prepare for the renewal of the strife in another form. But the appearance of June, bearing a white flag, and accompanied by the French officer and Muir, stayed the hands of all, and was the forerunner of another parley. The negotiation that followed was held beneath the blockhouse, and so near it as to at once to put those who were uncovered completely at the mercy of Pathfinder's unerring aim. Jasper anchored directly abeam, and the howitzer too was kept trained upon the negotiators, so that the besieged and their friends, with the exception of the man who held the match, had no hesitation about exposing their persons. Chingachgook alone lay in ambush, more, however, from habit than distrust. "You've triumphed, Pathfinder," called out the quartermaster, "and Captain Sanglier has come himself to offer terms. You'll no be denying a brave enemy honourable retreat, when he has fought you fairly, and done all the credit he could to king and country. You are too loyal a subject yourself to visit loyalty and fidelity with a heavy judgment. I am authorized to offer, on the part of the enemy, an evacuation of the island, a mutual exchange of prisoners, and a restoration of scalps. In the absence of baggage and artillery, little more can be done." As the conversation was necessarily carried on in a high key, both on account of the wind and of the distance, all that was said was heard equally by those in the block and those in the cutter. "What do you say to that, Jasper?" called out Pathfinder. "You hear the proposal. Shall we let the vagabonds go? Or shall we mark them, as they mark their sheep in the settlements, that we may know them again?" "What has befallen Mable, Dunham?" demanded the young man, with a frown on his handsome face, that was visible even to those on the block.
If a hair of her head has been touched, it will go hard with the whole Iroquois tribe."
"Nay, nay, she is safe below, nursing a dying parent, as becomes her sex. We owe no grudge on account of the Sergeant's hurt, which comes of lawful warfare; and as for Mabel—" "She is here," exclaimed the girl herself, who had mounted to the roof the moment she found the direction things were taking. "She is here; and in the name of our holy religion, and of that God whom we profess to worship in common, let there be no more bloodshed. Enough has been spilt already, and if these men will go away, Pathfinder, if they will depart peaceably, Jasper, oh, do not detain one of them. My poor father is approaching his end, and it were better that he should draw his last breath in peace with the world. Go, go, Frenchmen and Indians! We are no longer your enemies, and will harm none of you." "Tut, tut, Magnet," put in Cap. "This sounds religious, perhaps, or like a book of poetry, but it does not sound like common sense. The enemy is just ready to strike. Jasper is anchored with his broadside to bear, and, no doubt, with springs on his cables. Pathfinder's eye and hand are as true as the needle, and we shall get prize money, head money, and honor in the bargain, if you will not interfere for the next half hour." "Well," said Pathfinder, "I incline to Mabel's way of thinking. There has been enough blood shed to answer our purpose and to sarve the king; and as for honor, in that meaning, it will do better for young ensigns and recruits than for cool-headed, obsarvant Christian men. There is honor in doing what's right, and unhonor in doing what's wrong; and I think it wrong to take the life even of a Mingo without a useful end in view, I do, and right to hear reason at all times. So, Lieutenant Muir, let us know what your friends the Frenchers and Indians have to say for themselves."
"My friends!" said Muir, starting. "You'll not be calling the king's enemies my friends, Pathfinder, because the fortune of war has thrown me into their hands. Some of the greatest warriors, both of ancient and modern times, have been prisoners of war; and yon is Master Cap, who can testify whether we did not do all that men could devise to escape the calamity."
"Ay, ay," dryly answered Cap. "Escape is the proper word. We ran below and hid ourselves, and so discreetly that we might have remained in the hole to this hour, had it not been for the necessity of restowing the bread lockers. You burrowed on that occasion, Quartermaster, as handily as a fox, and how the devil you knew so well where to find the spot is a matter of wonder to me. A regular skulk on board ship does not trail aft more readily when the jib is to be stowed than you went into that same hole."
"And did ye not follow? There are moments in a man's life when reason ascends to instinct."
"And men descend into holes," interrupted Cap, laughing in his boisterous way, while Pathfinder chimed in his peculiar manner. Even Jasper, though still filled with concern for Mabel, was obliged to smile. "They say the devil wouldn't make a sailor if he didn't look aloft, and now it seems he'll not make a soldier if he doesn't look below." This burst of merriment, though it was anything but agreeable to Muir, contributed largely towards keeping the peace. Cap fancied he had said a thing much better than common, and that disposed him to yield his own opinion on the main point, so long as he got the good opinion of his companions on his novel claim to be a wit. After a short discussion, all the savages on the island were collected in a body, without arms, at the distance of 100 yards from the block and under the gun of the Scud, while Pathfinder descended to the door of the blockhouse and settled the terms on which the island was to be finally evacuated by the enemy. Considering all the circumstances, the conditions were not very discreditable to either party. The Indians were compelled to give up all their arms, even to their knives and tomahawks, as a measure of precaution, their force being still quadruple that of their foes. The French officer, Monsieur Sanglier, as he was usually styled, and chose to call himself, remonstrated against this act as one likely to reflect more discredit on his command than any other part of the affair; but Pathfinder, who had witnessed 1 or 2 Indian massacres, and knew how valueless pledges became when put in opposition to interest where a savage was concerned, was obdurate. The second stipulation was of nearly the same importance. It compelled Captain Sanglier to give up all his prisoners, who had been kept well guarded in the very hole or cave in which Cap and Muir had taken refuge. When these men were produced, 4 of them were found to be unhurt. They had fallen merely to save their lives, a common artifice in that species of warfare, and of the remainder 2 were so slightly injured as not to be unfit for service. As they brought their muskets with them, this addition to his force immediately put Pathfinder at his ease, for, having collected all the arms of the enemy in the blockhouse, he directed these men to take possession of the building, stationing a regular sentinel at the door. The remainder of the soldiers were dead, the badly wounded having been instantly dispatched, in order to obtain the much coveted scalps. As soon as Jasper was made acquainted with the terms, and the preliminaries had been so far observed as to render it safe for him to be absent, he got the Scud under way, and, running down to the point where the boats had stranded, he took them in tow again, and, making a few stretches, brought them into the leeward passage. Here all the savages instantly embarked, when Jasper took the boats in tow a third time, and running off before the wind, he soon set them adrift full a mile to leeward of the island. The Indians were furnished with but a single oar in each boat to steer with, the young sailor well knowing that by keeping before the wind they would land on the shores of Canada in the course of the morning. Captain Sanglier, Arrowhead, and June alone remained, when this disposition had been made of the rest of the party, the former having certain papers to draw up and sign with Lieutenant Muir, who in his eyes possessed the virtues which are attached to a commission, and the latter preferring, for reasons of his own, not to depart in company with his late friends, the Iroquois. Canoes were detained for the departure of these 3, when the proper moment should arrive. In the meantime, or while the Scud was running down with the boats in tow, Pathfinder and Cap, aided by proper assistants, busied themselves with preparing a breakfast, most of the party not having eaten for 24 hours. The brief space that passed in this manner before the Scud came to again was little interrupted by discourse, though Pathfinder found leisure to pay a visit to the Sergeant, to say a few friendly words to Mabel, and to give such directions as he thought might smooth the passage of the dying man. As for Mabel herself, he insisted on her taking some light refreshment, and, there no longer existing any motive for keeping it there, he had the guard removed from the block, in order that the daughter might have no impediment to her attentions to her father. These little arrangements completed, our hero returned to the fire, around which he found all the remainder of the party assembled, including Jasper. End of chapter. Chapter 26 of The Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 26. You saw but sorrow in its waning form, a waking sea remaining from a storm, where now the weary waves roll o'er the deep and faintly murmur ere they fall asleep. Attributed to Dryden. Men accustomed to a warfare like that we have been describing are not apt to be much under the influence of the tender feelings while still in the field. Notwithstanding their habits, however, more than one heart was with Mabel in the block, while the incidents we are about to relate were in the course of occurrence, and even the indispensable meal was less relished by the heartiest of the soldiers than it might have been had not the sergeant been so near his end. As Pathfinder returned from the block, he was met by Muir, who led him aside in order to hold a private discourse. The manner of the quartermaster had that air of supererogatory courtesy about it which almost invariably denotes artifice. For while physiognomy and phrenology are but lame sciences at the best, and perhaps lead to as many false as right conclusions, we hold that there is no more infallible evidence of insincerity of purpose, short of overt acts, than a face that smiles when there is no occasion, and the tongue that is out of measure smooth. Muir had much of this manner in common, mingled with an apparent frankness that his Scottish intonation of voice, Scottish accent, and Scottish modes of expression were singularly adapted to sustain. He owed his preferment, indeed, to a long exercised deference to Lundy and his family, for, while the Major himself was much too acute to be the dupe of one so much his inferior in real talents and attainments, most persons are accustomed to make liberal concessions to the flatterer, even while they distrust his truth and are perfectly aware of his motives. On the present occasion, the contest in skill was between two men as completely the opposites of each other in all the leading essentials of character as very well could be. Pathfinder was as simple as the quartermaster was practised. He was as sincere as the other was false, and as direct as the other was tortuous. Both were cool and calculating, and both were brave, though in different modes and degrees, Muir never exposing his person except for effect, while the guide included fear among the rational passions, or as a sensation to be deferred to only when good might come of it. "My dearest friend," Muir commenced, "for you'll be dearer to us all, by 70 and 7-fold, after your late conduct than ever you were, you've just established yourself in this late transaction. It's true that they'll not be making you a commissioned officer, for that species of preferment is not much in your line, nor much in your wishes, I'm thinking. But as a guide, and a counsellor, and a loyal subject, and an expert marksman, your renown may be said to be full. I doubt if the commander-in-chief will carry away with him from America as much credit as will fall to your share, and you ought just to set down in content and enjoy yourself for the remainder of your days. Get married, man, without delay, and look to your precious happiness, for you've no occasion to look any longer to your glory. Take Mable Dunham, for heaven's sake, to your bosom, and you'll both have a bonny bride and a bonny reputation." "Why, quartermaster, this is a new piece of advice to come from your mouth. They told me I had a rival in you." "And you had, man, and a formidable one, too, I can tell you. One that has never yet courted in vain, and yet one that has courted 5 times. Lundy twits me with 4, and I deny the charge, but he little thinks the truth would outdo even his arithmetic. Yes, you had a rival, Pathfinder, but you've one no longer in me. You've my hearty wishes for your success with Mable, and were the honest sergeant likely to survive, you might rely on my good word with him too, for a certainty." "I feel your friendship, quartermaster, I feel your friendship, though I have no great need of any favor with Sergeant Dunham, who has long been my friend. I believe we may look upon the matter to be as sartain as most things in war-time, for, Mabel and her father consenting, the whole 55th couldn't very well put a stop to it. Ah's me! The poor father will scarcely live to see what his heart has so long been set upon." "But he'll have the consolation of knowing it will come to pass, in dying. Oh, it's a great relief, Pathfinder, for the parting spirit to feel certain that the beloved ones left behind will be well provided for after its departure. All the Mistress Muirs have duly expressed that sentiment with their dying breaths." "All your wives, quartermaster, have been likely to feel this consolation." "Out upon you, man! I'd no thought you such a wag. Well, pleasant words make no heart-burnings between old friends. If I cannot espouse Mabel, you'll no object to my esteeming her, and speaking well of her, and of yourself too, on all suitable occasions and in all companies. But, Pathfinder, you easily understand that a poor devil who loses such a bride will probably stand in need of some consolation?" Quite likely, quartermaster," returned the simple-minded guide. "I know the loss of Mabel would be found heavy to be borne by myself. It may bear hard on your feelings to see us married, but the death of the sergeant will be likely to put it off, and you'll have time to think more manfully of it. You will."
I'll bear up against it. Yes, I'll bear up against it, though my heartstrings crack. And you might help me, man, by giving me something to do. You'll understand that this expedition has been of a very peculiar nature, for here am I, bearing the king's commission, just a volunteer, as it might be, while a mere orderly has had the command. I've submitted for various reasons, though my blood has boiled to be in authority, while you're war battling for the honor of the country and his Majesty's rights." "Quartermaster," interrupted the guide, "you fell so early into the enemy's hands that your conscience ought to be easily satisfied on that score. So take my advice, and say nothing about it." "That's just my opinion, Pathfinder. We'll all say nothing about it. Sergeant Dunham is hors de combat." "Anan?" said the guide.
"Why, the sergeant can command no longer, and it will hardly do to leave a corporal at the head of a victorious party like this, for flowers that will bloom in a garden will die on a heath. And I was just thinking I would claim the authority that belongs to one who holds a lieutenant's commission. As for the men, they'll no dare to raise any objection; and as for yourself, my dear friend, now that you've so much honor, and Mabel, and the consciousness of having done your duty, which is more precious than all, I expect to find an ally rather than one to oppose the plan."
"As for commanding the soldiers of the 55th, Lieutenant, it is your right, I suppose, and no one here will be likely to gainsay it, though you've been a prisoner of war, and there are men who might stand out again giving up their authority to a prisoner released by their own deeds. Still, no one here will be likely to say anything hostile to your wishes."
"That's just it, Pathfinder, and when I come to draw up the report of our success against the boats, and the defence of the block, together with the general operations, including the capitulation, you'll no find any omission of your claims and merits."
"Tut for my claims and merits, Quartermaster! Lundy knows what I am in the forest and what I am in the fort, and the general knows better than he. No fear of me. Tell your own story, only taking care to do justice by Mabel's father, who, in one sense, is the commanding officer at this very moment." Muir expressed his entire satisfaction with this arrangement, as well as his determination to do justice by all, when the two went to the group assembled around the fire. Here the quartermaster began, for the first time since leaving Oswego, to assume some of the authority that might properly be supposed to belong to his rank. Taking the remaining corporal aside, he distinctly told that functionary that he must in future be regarded as one holding the king's commission, and directed him to acquaint his subordinates with the new state of things. This change in the dynasty was effected without any of the usual symptoms of a revolution, for, as all well understood the lieutenant's legal claims to command, no one felt disposed to dispute his orders. For reasons best known to themselves, Lundy and the quartermaster had originally made a different disposition, and now, for reasons of his own, the latter had seen fit to change it. This was reasoning enough for soldiers, though the hurt received by Sergeant Dunham would have sufficiently explained the circumstance had an explanation been required. All this time Captain Sanglier was looking after his own breakfast with the resignation of a philosopher, the coolness of a veteran, the ingenuity and science of a Frenchman, and the veracity of an ostrich. This person had now been in the colony some 30 years, having left France in some such situation in his own army as Muir filled in the 55th. An iron constitution, perfect obduracy of feeling, a certain address well suited to manage savages, and an indomitable courage, had early pointed him out to the commander-in-chief as a suitable agent to be employed in directing the military operations of his Indian allies. In this capacity, then, he had risen to the titular rank of captain, and with his promotion had acquired a portion of the habits and opinions of his associates with a facility and an adaptation of self which are thought in America to be peculiar to his countrymen. He had often led parties of the Iroquois in their predatory expeditions, and his conduct on such occasions exhibited the contradictory results of both alleviating the misery produced by this species of warfare, and of augmenting it by the broader views and greater resources of civilization.
In other words, he planned enterprises that, in their importance and consequences, much exceeded the usual policy of the Indians, and then stepped in to lessen some of the evils of his own creating. In short, he was an adventurer whom circumstances had thrown into a situation where the callous qualities of men of his class might readily show themselves for good or for evil, and he was not of a character to baffle fortune by any ill-timed squeamishness on the score of early impressions, or to trifle with her liberality by unnecessarily provoking her frowns through wanton cruelty. Still, as his name was unavoidably connected with many of the excesses committed by his parties, he was generally considered in the American provinces a wretch who delighted in bloodshed, and who found his greatest happiness in tormenting the helpless and the innocent, and the name of Sanglier, which was a sobriquet of his own adopting, or of Flint Heart, as he was usually termed on the borders, had got to be as terrible to the women and children of that part of the country as those of Butler and Brant became at a later day. The meeting between Pathfinder and Sanglier bore some resemblance to that celebrated interview between Wellington and Blucher which had been so often and graphically told. It took place at the fire, and the parties stood earnestly regarding each other for more than a minute without speaking. Each felt that in the other he saw a formidable foe, and each felt, while he ought to treat the other with the manly liberality due a warrior, that there was little in common between them in the way of character as well as of interests. One served for money and preferment, the other because his life had been cast in the wilderness, and the land of his birth needed his arm and experience. The desire of rising above his present situation never disturbed the tranquillity of Pathfinder, nor had he ever known an ambitious thought, as ambition usually betrays itself, until he became acquainted with Mabel. Since then, indeed, distrust of himself, reverence for her, and the wish to place her in a situation above that which he then filled, had caused him some uneasy moments, but the directness and simplicity of his character had early afforded the required relief, and he soon came to feel that the woman who would not hesitate to accept him for her husband would not scruple to share his fortunes, however humble. He respected Sanglier as a brave warrior, and he had far too much of that liberality which is the result of practical knowledge to believe half of what he had heard to his prejudice, for the most bigoted and illiberal on every subject are usually those who know nothing about it. But he could not approve of his selfishness, cold-blooded calculations, and least of all of the manner in which he forgot his white gifts, to adopt those that were purely red. On the other hand, Pathfinder was a riddle to Captain Sanglier. The latter could not comprehend the other's motives. He had often heard of his disinterestedness, justice, and truth, and in several instances they had led him into grave errors, on that principle by which a frank and open-mouthed diplomatist is said to keep his secrets better than one that is close-mouthed and wily. After the two heroes had gazed at each other in the manner mentioned, Monsieur Sanglier touched his cap, for the rudeness of a border life had not entirely destroyed the courtesy of manner he had acquired in youth, nor extinguished that appearance of bonhomie which seems inbred in a Frenchman. "Monsieur le Pathfinder," said he, with a very decided accent, though with a friendly smile, "un militaire honneur le courage et la loyauté. You speak Iroquois?" "Ay, I understand the language of the reptiles, and can get along with it if there's occasion," returned the literal and truth-telling guide. "But it's neither a tongue nor a tribe to my taste. Wherever you find the Mingo blood, in my opinion, Master Flinty Heart, you find a knave. Well, I've seen you often, though it was in battle, and I must say it was always in the van. You must know most of our bullets by sight?" "Nowhere, sir, your own une balle from your honourable hand be certain death. You kill my best water on some island." That may be, though I dare say, if the truth was known, they would turn out to be great rascals. No offence to you, Master Flinty Heart, but you keep desperate evil company." "Yes, sir," returned the Frenchman, who, bent on saying that which was courteous himself, and comprehending with difficulty, was disposed to think he received a compliment. "You too good. But un brave, always comme ça." What that mean? Ha! What that jeune homme do? The hand and eye of Captain Sanglier directed the look of Pathfinder to the opposite side of the fire, where Jasper, just at that moment, had been rudely seized by two of the soldiers who were binding his arms under the direction of Muir. "What does that mean, indeed?" cried the guide, stepping forward, and shoving the two subordinates away with a power of muscle that would not be denied. "Who has the heart to do this to Jasper Eau douce, and who has the boldness to do it before my eyes?" "It is by my orders, Pathfinder," answered the quartermaster, "and I command it on my own responsibility. You'll not take on yourself to dispute the legality of orders given by one who bears the king's commission to the king's soldiers." "I dispute the king's words if they came from the king's own mouth, did he say that Jasper desarves this. Has not the lad just saved all our scalps, taken us from defeat and given us victory? No, no, Lieutenant. If this is the first use that you make of your authority, I, for one, will not respect it." "This savors a little of insubordination," answered Muir, "but we can bear much from Pathfinder. It is true that Jasper has seemed to serve us in this affair, but we ought not to overlook past transactions. Did not Major Duncan himself denounce him to Sergeant Dunham before we left the post? Have we not seen sufficient with our own eyes to make sure of having been betrayed? And is it not natural, and almost necessary, to believe that this young man has been the traitor? Ah, Pathfinder, you'll not be making yourself a great statesman or a great captain if you put too much faith in appearances. Lord bless me, if I do not believe, could the truth be come at, as you often say yourself, Pathfinder, that hypocrisy is a more common vice than even envy, and that's the bane of human nature." Captain Sanglier shrugged his shoulders, then he looked earnestly from Jasper towards the quartermaster, and from the quartermaster towards Jasper. "I care not for your envy or your hypocrisy, or even for your human nature," returned Pathfinder. "Jasper Eau douce is my friend. Jasper Eau douce is a brave lad, and an honest lad, and a loyal lad, and no man of the 55th shall lay hands on him short of Lundy's own orders, while I'm in the way to prevent it. You may have authority over your soldiers, but you have none over Jasper and me, Master Muir." "Bon!" ejaculated Sanglier, the sound partaking equally of the energies of the throat and of the nose. "Will ye no hearken to reason, Pathfinder? You'll not be forgetting our suspicions and judgments, and here is another circumstance to augment and aggravate them all. You can see this little bit of bunting. Well, where should it be found but by Mable Dunham on the branch of a tree on this very island, just an hour or so before the attack of the enemy, and if you'll be at the trouble to look at the fly of the Scud's ensign, you'll just say that the cloth has been cut out from it. Circumstantial evidence was never stronger." "Ma foi, c'est un petit fort, ceci," growled Sanglier between his teeth. "Talk to me of no ensigns and signals when I know the heart," continued the Pathfinder. "Jasper has the gift of honesty, and it's too rare a gift to be trifled with, like a Mingo's conscience. No, no, off hands, or we shall see which can make the stoutest battle, you and your men of the 55th, or the Sarpent here, and Killdeer, with Jasper and his crew. You overrate your force, Lieutenant Muir, as much as you underrate Eau douce's truth." "Très bon!" "Well, if I must speak plainly, Pathfinder, I e'en must. Captain Sanglier here, and Arrowhead, this brave Tuscarora, have both informed me that this unfortunate boy is the traitor. After such testimony, you can no longer oppose my right to correct him, as well as the necessity of the act." "Scélérat!" muttered the Frenchman. Captain Sanglier is a brave soldier, and will not gainsay the conduct of an honest sailor," put in Jasper. "Is there any traitor here, Captain Flinty Heart?"
"Ay," added Muir. "Let him speak out, then, since ye wish it, unhappy youth, that the truth may be known. I only hope that ye may escape the last punishment when a court will be sitting on your misdeeds. How is it, captain? Do ye, or do ye not, see a traitor among us?"
"Oui."
"Yes, sir. Bien sûr." "Too much lie," said Arrowhead in a voice of thunder, striking the breast of Muir with the back of his own hand in a sort of ungovernable gesture. "Where my warriors? Where Yankee's scalp? Too much lie." Muir wanted not for personal courage, nor for a certain sense of personal honor. The violence which had been intended only for a gesture he mistook for a blow, for conscience was suddenly aroused within him, and he stepped back a pace, extending his hand towards a gun. His face was livid with rage, and his countenance expressed the fell intention of his heart. But Arrowhead was too quick for him. With a wild glance of the eye the Tuscarora looked about him, then thrust a hand beneath his own girdle, drew forth a concealed knife, and in the twinkling of an eye buried it in the body of the quartermaster to the handle. As the latter fell at his feet, gazing into his face with the vacant stare of one surprised by death, Sanglier took a pinch of snuff, and said in a calm voice, "Voilà l'affaire finie, mais," shrugging his shoulders, "ce n'est qu'un scélérat de moins." The act was too sudden to be prevented, and when Arrowhead, uttering a yell, bounded into the bushes, the white men were too confounded to follow. Chingachgook, however, was more collected, and the bushes had scarcely closed on the passing body of the Tuscarora than they were again opened by that of the Delaware in full pursuit. Jasper Western spoke French fluently, and the words and manner of Sanglier struck him. "Speak, monsieur," said he in English. "Am I the traitor?" "Le voilà," answered the cool Frenchman. "Dat is our espion, our agent, our friend. Ma foi, c'était un grand scélérat. Voici." While speaking, Sanglier bent over the dead body, and thrust his hand into a pocket of the quartermaster, out of which he drew a purse. Emptying the contents on the ground, several double louis rolled towards the soldiers, who were not slow in picking them up. Casting the purse from him in contempt, the soldier of fortune turned towards the soup he had been preparing with so much care, and, finding it to his liking, he began to break his fast with an air of indifference that the most stoical Indian warrior might have envied. End of chapter. Chapter 27 of The Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 27. The only amaranthian flower on earth is virtue. The only lasting treasure, truth. Attributed to Cowper. The reader must imagine some of the occurrences that followed the sudden death of Muir. While his body was in the hands of his soldiers, who laid it decently aside and covered it with a greatcoat, Chingachgook silently resumed his place at the fire, and both Sanglier and Pathfinder remarked that he carried a fresh and bleeding scalp at his girdle. No one asked any questions, and the former, although perfectly satisfied that Arrowhead had fallen, manifested neither curiosity nor feeling. He continued calmly eating his soup, as if the meal had been tranquil as usual. There was something of pride and of an assumed indifference to fate, imitated from the Indians, in all this, and there was more that really resulted from practice, habitual self-command, and constitutional hardihood. With Pathfinder the case was a little different in feeling, though much the same in appearance. He disliked Muir, whose smooth-tongued courtesy was little in accordance with his own frank and ingenuous nature.
but he had been shocked at this unexpected and violent death, though accustomed to similar scenes, and he had been surprised at the exposure of his treachery. With a view to ascertain the extent of the latter, as soon as the body was removed, he began to question the captain on the subject. The latter, having no particular motive for secrecy now that his agent was dead, in the course of the breakfast revealed the following circumstances, which will serve to clear up some of the minor incidents of our tale. Soon after the 55th appeared on the frontiers, Muir had volunteered his services to the enemy. In making his offers, he boasted of his intimacy with Lundy, and the means it afforded of furnishing more accurate and important information than usual. His terms had been accepted, and Monsieur Sanglier had several interviews with him in the vicinity of the fort at Oswego, and had actually passed one entire night secreted in the garrison. Arrowhead, however, was the usual channel of communication, and the anonymous letter to Major Duncan had been originally written by Muir, transmitted to Frontenac, copied, and sent back by the Tuscarora, who was returning from that errand when captured by the Scud. It is scarcely necessary to add that Jasper was to be sacrificed in order to conceal the quartermaster's treason, and that the position of the island had been betrayed to the enemy by the latter. An extraordinary compensation, that which was found in his purse, had induced him to accompany the party under Sergeant Dunham, in order to give the signals that were to bring on the attack. The disposition of Muir towards the sex was a natural weakness, and he would have married Mabel, or any one else who would accept his hand, but his admiration of her was in a great degree feigned, in order that he might have an excuse for accompanying the party without sharing in the responsibility of its defeat, or incurring the risk of having no other strong and seemingly sufficient motive. Much of this was known to Captain Sanglier, particularly the part in connection with Mabel, and he did not fail to let his auditors into the whole secret, frequently laughing in a sarcastic manner as he revealed the different expedients of the luckless quartermaster. "Touchez là," said the cold-blooded partisan, holding out his sinewy hand to Pathfinder, when he ended his explanations. "You be honnête, and that is beaucoup. We take the spy as we take la médecin for the good, mais je le déteste. Touchez là." "I'll shake your hand, Captain, I will, for you're a lawful and natural enemy," returned Pathfinder, "and a manful one. But the body of the quartermaster shall never disgrace English ground. I did intend to carry it back to Lundy that he might place his bagpipes over it, but now it shall lie here on the spot where he acted his villainy, and have his own treason for a headstone. Captain Flintyheart, I suppose this consorting with traitors is a part of a soldier's regular business, but I tell you honestly, it is not to my liking, and I'd rather it should be you than I who had this affair on his conscience. What an awful sinner! To plot, right and left, ag'in country, friends, and the Lord! Jasper, boy, a word with you aside, for a single minute." Jasper now led the young man apart, and, squeezing his hand, with the tears in his own eyes, he continued, "You know me, Eau douce, and I know you," said he, "and this news has not changed my opinion of you in any manner. I never believed their tales, though it looked solemn at one minute, I will own. Yes, it did look solemn, and it made me feel solemn too. I never suspected you for a minute, for I know your gifts don't lie that-a-way, but I must own I didn't suspect the quartermaster neither."
"And he holding the Majesty's commission, Pathfinder."
"It isn't so much that, Jasper Western. It isn't so much that. He held a commission from God to act right, and to deal fairly with his fellow creatures, and he's failed awfully in his duty."
"To think of his pretending love for one like Mabel, too, when he felt none."
"That was bad, sartainly. The fellow must have had Mingo blood in his veins. The man that deals unfairly by a woman can be but a mongrel, lad, for the Lord has made them helpless on purpose that we may gain their love by kindness and sarvices. Here is the sergeant, poor man, on his dying bed. He has given me his daughter for a wife, and Mabel, dear girl, she has consented to it, and it makes me feel that I have two welfares to look after,
2 natures to care for, and 2 hearts to gladden. Ah's me, Jasper, I sometimes feel that I'm not good enough for that sweet child." Eau douce had nearly gasped for breath when he first heard this intelligence, and though he succeeded in suppressing any other outward signs of agitation, his cheek was blanched nearly to the paleness of death. Still he found means to answer, not only with firmness but with energy. "Say not so, Pathfinder. You are good enough for a queen." "Ay, ay, boy, according to your ideas of my goodness; that is to say, I can kill a deer, or even a Mingo at need, with any man on the lines; or I can follow a forest path with as true an eye, or read the stars, when others do not understand them. No doubt, Mabel will have venison enough, and fish enough, and pigeons enough. But will she have knowledge enough, and will she have ideas enough, and pleasant conversation enough, when life comes to drag a little, and each of us begins to pass for our true value?" "If you pass for your value, Pathfinder, the greatest lady in the land would be happy with you. On that head you have no reason to feel afraid." "Now, Jasper, I dare to say you think so; nay, I know you do, for it is natural, and according to friendship, for people to look over favorably at them they love. Yes, if I had to marry you, boy, I should give myself no consarn about my being well looked upon, for you have always shown a disposition to see me and all I do with friendly eyes. But a young gal, after all, must wish to marry a man that is nearer to her own age and fancies than to have one old enough to be her father, and rude enough to frighten her. I wonder, Jasper, that Mabel never took a fancy to you now, rather than setting her mind on me." "Take a fancy to me, Pathfinder!" returned the young man, endeavoring to clear his voice without betraying himself. "What is there about me to please such a girl as Mabel Dunham? I have all that you find fault with in yourself, with none of that excellence that makes even the generals respect you." Well, it's all chance, say what we will about it. Here have I journeyed and guided through the woods female after female, and consorted with them in the garrisons, and never have I even felt an inclination for any, until I saw Mabel Dunham. It's true the poor sergeant first set me to thinking about his daughter, but after we got a little acquainted like, I'd no need of being spoken to think of her night and day. I'm tough, Jasper, yes, I'm very tough, and I'm resolute enough, as you all know, and yet I do think it would quite break me down now to lose Mabel Dunham." "We will talk no more of it, Pathfinder," returning his friend's squeeze of the hand, and moving back towards the fire, though slowly, and in the manner of one who cared little where he went. "We will talk no more of it. You are worthy of Mabel, and Mabel is worthy of you. You like Mabel, and Mabel likes you. Her father has chosen you for her husband, and no one has a right to interfere. As for the quartermaster, his feigning love for Mabel is worse even than his treason to the king." By this time they were so near the fire that it was necessary to change the conversation. Luckily, at that instant, Cap, who had been in the block in company with his dying brother-in-law, and who knew nothing of what had passed since the capitulation, now appeared, walking with a meditative and melancholy air towards the group. Much of that hearty dogmatism, that imparted even to his ordinary air and demeanor an appearance of something like contempt for all around him, had disappeared, and he seemed thoughtful, if not meek. "This death, gentlemen," said he, when he had got sufficiently near, "is a melancholy business. Make the best of it. Now here is Sergeant Dunham, a very good soldier, I make no question, about to slip his cable, and yet he holds on to the better end of it, as if he was determined it should never run out of the hawse hole, and all because he loves his daughter, it seems to me. For my part, when a friend is really under the necessity of making a long journey, I always wish him well and happily off." "You wouldn't kill the sergeant before his time," Pathfinder reproachfully answered. "Life is sweet, even to the aged, and, for that matter, I've known some that seemed to set much store by it when it got to be of the least value." Nothing had been further from Cap's real thoughts than the wish to hasten his brother-in-law's end. He had found himself embarrassed with the duties of smoothing a death-bed, and all he had meant was to express a sincere desire that the Sergeant were happily rid of doubt and suffering. A little shocked, therefore, at the interpretation that had been put on his words, he rejoined with some of the asperity of the man, though rebuked by a consciousness of not having done his own wishes justice. "You are too old and too sensible a person, Pathfinder," said he, "to fetch a man up with a surge, when he is paying out his ideas in distress, as it might be. Sergeant Dunham is both my brother-in-law and my friend, that is to say, as intimate a friend as a soldier well can be with a seafaring man, and I respect and honor him accordingly. I make no doubt, moreover, that he has lived such a life as becomes a man, and there can be no great harm, after all, in wishing any one well berthed in heaven. Well, we are mortal, the best of us, that you'll not deny, and it ought to be a lesson not to feel pride in our strength and beauty. Where is the quartermaster, Pathfinder? It is proper he should come and have a parting word with the poor sergeant, who is only going a little before us." "You have spoken more truth, Master Cap, than you've been knowing to, all this time. You might have gone further, notwithstanding, and said that we are mortal, the worst of us, which is quite as true, and a good deal more wholesome than saying that we are mortal, the best of us. As for the quartermaster's coming to speak a parting word to the sergeant, it is quite out of the question, seeing that he has gone ahead, and that too with little parting notice to himself or to any one else." "You are not quite so clear as common in your language, Pathfinder. I know that we ought all to have solemn thoughts on these occasions, but I see no use in speaking in parables." "If my words are not plain, the idea is. In short, Master Cap, while Sergeant Dunham has been preparing himself for a long journey, like a conscientious and honest man as he is, deliberately, the quartermaster has started in a hurry before him, and although it is a matter on which it does not become me to be very positive, I give it as my opinion that they travel such different roads that they will never meet." "Explain yourself, my friend," said the bewildered seaman, looking around him in search of Muir, whose absence began to excite his distrust. "I see nothing of the quartermaster, but I think him too much of a man to run away, now that the victory is gained. If the fight were ahead instead of in our wake, the case would be altered." "There lies all that is left of him beneath that greatcoat," returned the guide, who then briefly related the manner of the lieutenant's death. "The Tuscarora was as venomous in his blow as a rattler, though he failed to give the warning," continued Pathfinder. "I've seen many a desperate fight, and several of these sudden outbreaks of savage temper, but never before did I see a human soul quit the body more unexpectedly, or at a worse moment for the hopes of the dying man. His breath was stopped with the lie on his lips, and the spirit might be said to have passed away in the very ardor of wickedness." Cap listened with a gaping mouth, and he gave 2 or 3 violent hems, as the other concluded, like one who distrusted his own respiration. "This is an uncertain and uncomfortable life of yours, Master Pathfinder, what between the fresh water and the savages," said he; "and the sooner I get quit of it, the higher will be my opinion of myself. Now you mention it, I will say that the man ran for that berth in the rocks, when the enemy first bore down upon us, with a sort of instinct that I thought surprising in an officer, but I was in too great a hurry to follow to log the whole matter accurately. God bless me! God bless me! A traitor, do you say, and ready to sell his country, and to a rascally Frenchman, too." "To sell anything, country, soul, body, Mable, and all our scalps, and no ways particular, I'll engage, as to the purchaser. The countrymen of Captain Flinty Heart here were the paymasters this time." "Just like 'em, ever ready to buy when they can't thrash, and to run when they can do neither." Monsieur Sanglier lifted his cap with ironical gravity,
and acknowledged the compliment with an expression of polite contempt that was altogether lost on its insensible object. But Pathfinder had too much native courtesy, and was far too just-minded, to allow the attack to go unnoticed. "Well, well," he interposed, "to my mind there is no great difference between an Englishman and a Frenchman, after all. They talk different tongues, and live under different kings, I will allow; but both are human, and feel like human beings when there is occasion for it." Captain Flinty Heart, as Pathfinder called him, made another obeisance, but this time the smile was friendly and not ironical, for he felt that the intention was good, whatever might have been the mode of expressing it. Too philosophical, however, to heed what a man like Cap might say or think, he finished his breakfast without allowing his attention to be again diverted from that important pursuit. "My business here was principally with the quartermaster," as soon as he had done regarding the prisoner's pantomime. "The sergeant must be near his end, and I have thought he might wish to say something to his successor in authority before he finally departed. It is too late, it would seem, and as you say, Pathfinder, the lieutenant has truly gone before." "That he has, though on a different path. As for authority, I suppose the corporal has now a right to command what's left of the 55th, though a small and worried, not to say frightened, party it is. But, if anything needs to be done, the chances are greatly in favor of my being called on to do it. I suppose, however, we have only to bury our dead, set fire to the block and the huts, for they stand in the enemy's territory by position, if not by law, and must not be left for their convenience. Our using them again is out of the question, for now the Frenchers know where the island is to be found, it would be like thrusting the hand into a wolf trap with our eyes wide open. This part of the work the Sarpent and I will see to, for we are as practised in retreats as in advances." "All that is very well, my good friend. And now for my poor brother-in-law. Although he is a soldier, we cannot let him slip without a word of consolation and a leave-taking, in my judgment. This has been an unlucky affair on every tack, though I suppose it is what one had a right to expect, considering the state of the times and the nature of the navigation. We must make the best of it, and try to help the worthy man to unmoor, without straining his messengers. Death is a circumstance, after all, Master Pathfinder, and one of a very general character, too, seeing that we must all submit to it, sooner or later." "You say truth, and for that reason I hold it to be wise to be always ready. I've often thought, Saltwater, that he is the happiest who has the least to leave behind him when the summons comes. Now, here am I, a hunter and a scout and a guide, on a foot of land on earth. Yet do I enjoy and possess more than the great Albany patroon. With the heavens over my head to keep me in mind of the last great hunt, and the dried leaves beneath my feet, I tramp over the ground as freely as if I was its lord and owner. And what more need heart desire? I do not say that I love nothing that belongs to 'arth, for I do, although not much, unless it might be Mable Dunham, that I can't carry with me. I have some pups at the higher fort that I value considerably, though they are too noisy for warfare, and so we are compelled to live separate for a while. And then I think it would grieve me to part with Killdeer, but I see no reason why we should not be buried in the same grave, for we are as near as can be of the same length, 6 feet to a hair's breadth. But, bating these, and a pipe that the Sarpent gave me, and a few tokens received from travellers, all of which might be put in a pouch and laid under my head, when the order comes to march I shall be ready at a minute's warning. And let me tell you, Master Cap, that's what I call a circumstance, too." "'Tis just so with me," answered the sailor, as the two walked towards the block, too much occupied with their respective morality to remember at the moment the melancholy errand they were on. "That's just my way of feeling and reasoning. How often have I felt, when near shipwreck, the relief of not owning the craft! If she goes, I have said to myself, why, my life goes with her, but not my property, and there's great comfort in that. I've discovered, in the course of boxing about the world from the Horn to Cape North, not to speak of this run on a bit of fresh water, that if a man has a few dollars and puts them in a chest under lock and key, he is pretty certain to fasten up his heart in the same till, and so I carry pretty much all I own in a belt round my body, in order, as I say, to keep the vitals in the right place. Damn me, Pathfinder, if I think a man without a heart any better than a fish with a hole in his air bag." "I don't know how that may be, Master Cap, but a man without a conscience is but a poor creature, take my word for it, as any one will discover who has to do with a Mingo. I trouble myself but little with dollars or half-joes, for these are the favorite coin in this part of the world, but I can easily believe, by what I've seen of mankind, that if a man has a chest filled with either, he may be said to lock up his heart in the same box. I once hunted for 2 summers, during the last peace, and I collected so much peltry that I found my right feelings giving way to a craving after property, and if I have consarn in marrying Mabel, it is that I may get to love such things too well in order to make her comfortable." "You're a philosopher, that's clear, Pathfinder, and I don't know but you're a Christian." "I should be out of humor with the man that gainsayed the last, Master Cap. I have not been Christianized by the Moravians, like so many of the Delawares, it is true, but I hold to Christianity and white gifts. With me it is as uncreditable for a white man not to be a Christian as it is for a redskin not to believe in his happy hunting grounds. Indeed, after allowing for difference in traditions, and in some variations about the manner in which the spirit will be occupied after death, I hold that a good Delaware is a good Christian, though he never saw a Moravian, and a good Christian a good Delaware, so far as nature is concerned. The Sarpent and I talk these matters over often, for he has a hankering after Christianity." "The devil he has!" interrupted Cap. "And what does he intend to do in a church with all the scalps he takes?" "Don't run away with a false idea, friend Cap, don't run away with a false idea. These things are only skin deep, and all depend on edication and natural gifts. Look around you at mankind, and tell me why you see a red warrior here, a black one there, and white armies in another place. All this, and a great deal more of the same kind that I could point out, has been ordered for some special purpose, and is not for us to fly in the face of facts and deny their truth. No, no, each color has its gifts, and its laws, and its traditions, and one is not to condemn another because he does not exactly comprehend it." "You must have read a great deal, Pathfinder, to see things so clear as this," returned Cap, not a little mystified by his companion's simple creed. "It's all as plain as day to me now, though I must say I never fell in with these opinions before. What denomination do you belong to, my friend?" "Anan?" "What sect do you hold out for? What particular church do you fetch up in?" "Look about you, and judge for yourself. I'm in church now. I eat in church, drink in church, sleep in church. The arth is the temple of the Lord, and I wait on him hourly, daily, without ceasing, I humbly hope. No, no, I'll not deny my blood and color, but am Christian born, and shall die in the same faith. The Moravians tried me hard, and one of the king's chaplains has had his say too, though that's a class no way strenuous on such matters, and a missionary sent from Rome talked much with me, as I guided him through the forest during the last peace, but I've had one answer for them all. I'm a Christian already, and want to be neither Moravian, nor churchman, nor papist. No, no, I'll not deny my birth and blood." "I think a word from you might lighten the sergeant over the shoals of death, Master Pathfinder. He has no one with him but poor Mabel, and she, you know, besides being his daughter, is but a girl and a child after all." "Mabel is feeble in body, friend Cap, but in matters of this nature I doubt if she may not be stronger than most men. But Sergeant Dunham is my friend, and he is your brother-in-law. So now the press of fighting and maintaining our rights is over, it is fitting we should both go and witness his departure.
I've stood by many a dying man, Master Cap," continued Pathfinder, who had a besetting propensity to enlarge on his experience, stopping and holding his companion by a button. "I've stood by many a dying man's side, and seen his last gasp, and heard his last breath; for, when the hurry and tumult of the battle is over, it is good to bethink us of the misfortunate, and it is remarkable to witness how differently human nature feels at such solemn moments. Some go their way as stupid and ignorant as if God had never given them reason and an accountable state, while others quit us rejoicing, like men who leave heavy burthens behind them. I think that the mind sees clearly at such moments, my friend, and that past deeds stand thick before the recollection." "I'll engage they do, Pathfinder. I have witnessed something of this myself, and I hope I'm the better man for it. I remember once that I thought my own time had come, and the log was overhauled with a diligence I did not think myself capable of until that moment. I've not been a very great sinner, friend Pathfinder, that is to say, never on a large scale, though I dare say, if the truth were spoken, a considerable amount of small matters might be raked up against me, as well as against another man. But then, I've never committed piracy, nor high treason, nor arson, nor any of them sort of things. As to smuggling, and the like of that, why, I'm a seafaring man, and I suppose all callings have their weak spots. I dare say your trade is not altogether without blemish, honorable and useful as it seems to be." "Many of the scouts and guides are desperate knaves, and, like the quartermaster here, some of them take pay of both sides. I hope I'm not one of them, though all occupations lead to temptations. Thrice have I been sorely tried in my life, and once I yielded a little, though I hope it was not in a matter to disturb a man's conscience in his last moments. The first time was when I found in the woods a pack of skins that I knowed belonged to a Frencher who was hunting on our side of the lines, where he had no business to be. 26 as handsome beavers as ever gladdened human eyes. Well, that was a sore temptation, for I thought the law would have been almost with me, although it was in peace times. But then I remembered that such laws wasn't made for us hunters, and bethought me that the poor man might have built great expectations for the next winter on the sale of his skins, and I left them where they lay. Most of our people said I did wrong, but the manner in which I slept that night convinced me that I had done right. The next trial was when I found the rifle that is sartainly the only one in this part of the world that can be calculated on as surely as killdeer, and knowed that by taking it, or even hiding it, I might at once rise to be the first shot in all these parts. I was then young, and by no means so expart as I have since got to be, and youth is ambitious and striving. But God be praised, I mastered that feelin', and, friend Cap, what is almost as good, I mastered my rival in as fair a shooting match as was ever witnessed in a garrison, he with his piece, and I with Killdeer, and before the general in person too." Here Pathfinder stopped to laugh, his triumph still glittering in his eyes and glowing on his sunburnt and brown cheek. "Well, the next conflict with the devil was the hardest of them all, and that was when I came suddenly upon a camp of 6 Mingos asleep in the woods, with their guns and horns piled in a way that enabled me to get possession of them without waking a miscreant of them all. What an opportunity that would have been for the sarpent, who would have dispatched them, one after another, with his knife, and had their 6 scalps at his girdle, in about the time it takes me to tell you the story. Oh, he's a valiant warrior, that Chingachgook, and as honest as he's brave, and as good as he's honest." "And what may you have done in this matter, Master Pathfinder?" demanded Cap, who began to be interested in the result. "It seems to me you had made either a very lucky or a very unlucky landfall." "'Twas lucky, and 'twas unlucky, if you can understand that. 'Twas unlucky, for it proved a desperate trial, and yet 'twas lucky, all things considered, in the end. I did not touch a hair of their heads, for a white man has no natural gifts to take scalps, nor did I even make sure of one of their rifles.
I distrusted myself, knowing that a Mingo was no favorite in my own eyes. "As for the scalps, I think you were right enough, my worthy friend; but as for the armament and the stores, they would have been condemned by any prize court in Christendom." That they would, that they would; but then the Mingos would have gone clear, seeing that a white man can no more attack an unarmed than a sleeping enemy. No, I did myself, and my color, and my religion too, greater justice. I waited till their nap was over, and they well on their war path again, and by ambushing them here and flanking them there, I peppered the blackguards intrinsically like Pathfinder occasionally caught a fine word from his associates and used it a little vaguely that only one ever got back to his village, and he came into his wigwam limping. Luckily, as it turned out, the great Delaware had only halted to jerk some venison, and was following on my trail, and when he got up he had 5 of the scoundrels' scalps hanging where they ought to be. So you see, nothing was lost by doing right, either in the way of honor or in that of profit. Cap grunted an assent, though the distinctions in his companion's morality, it must be owned, were not exactly clear to his understanding. The two had occasionally moved towards the block as they conversed, and then stopped again as some matter of more interest than common brought them to a halt. They were now so near the building, however, that neither thought of pursuing the subject any further, but each prepared himself for the final scene with Sergeant Dunham. End of chapter.